So again, I want to welcome everybody here to Success Requires the Right Strategy, Culture, and Leadership. It's not one, it's not two, it's three. It's putting it all together. And so with that, let us begin. One of the things that I like to do, and for those of you who know, have followed us before, we've been doing presentations a long time, is I'm a teacher and I like to just define terms. So let's talk about the corporate standards that every company should be working on. From an individual point of view, what we're really looking at is something called strategic job performance. And that is the person doing those things that enable the company to achieve its strategic goals? This is very important. I spend a lot of time, I know, coaching my clients. In fact, this afternoon I'm helping someone with a marketing applicant to really focus on that people do those activities which make the greatest difference in the company for what their role should be. This is very important to do. Most people, when they're doing job descriptions, they're looking at experience, they're looking at schooling. None of that really matters. What really matters is the ability to have the skills and acumen to do the job you're looking for well. So I used to joke people when I was a CEO of Brilliant Image, I make coffee in the morning because this is my way of learning about people in the company and sharing a relationship with them. But the really critical part of all of that was that it wasn't my strategic job performance. As the CEO and leader, my strategic job performance was casting a direction for the company and helping set the culture and making sure that all of the standards within the different departments, marketing, sales, etc., were meeting the standards we wanted, while the president, COO, was working on executing it. So it's really very clear what it is you do that's unique to what you're doing to make the company work. So again, if I'm on an assembly line and I'm assembling windshield wipers, it's making sure that they're all working, put in correctly, etc. I think if General Motors spent more time on that, maybe they'd have had less problems. The second thing that we have to do is focus on cultural alignment. And that is, are people within the company focusing on the values that you consider core to the company and adhering to them? Now, if you talk about values, most companies can sit down and articulate honesty, integrity, customer service, things like that, but really being explicit about what it is, and then making sure that everyone is aligned to it, meaning it's what they do every day. And the real answer to this is not just understanding the values, but it's the behaviors, watching what they do. So that if a customer calls and says, I need some help, and you go, well, we value you very much, and put them on hold for 20 minutes, which we all go through with many companies, then we know that the behavior is not really aligned with the value system. So cultural alignment is the second part. There's an overall strategic goal that every company has, and that is not only to achieve what it's trying to do, offer great banking with great interest rates with lower risk, but have a competitive advantage over the rivals. We're going to spend a little time on that in about 4 weeks, December 3rd, actually. I will teach you something called commanding strategies. It's what sustainable competitive advantages are about. Today, most people, in fact, there's a professor at Columbia who argues you can't talk about competitive advantage because they're transient. My argument is they're not if they're sustainable from the beginning, and that's learning how to leverage a weakness of the company that you're competing with against themselves. And the final part is what's the overall cultural standard. In other words, everyone needs to know that if they follow the culture and they do their strategic performance, they win, the company wins. And that's the overall standard that you want to use. So the corporate standards deal with individuals, the entire group of culture, the strategy that's going to override everybody's movement, etc. And as you can see, if you haven't maintained one, and we'll look at this chart in greater depth, of all these issues, you can really succeed, and that's what it's about. So I'm going to focus on profitable growth from a sustainable point of view by addressing the three parts: strategy, culture, and talent development. Again, it's about leadership. It's about people's ability to take you where you're trying to go. To do that, we need to understand why this is such a big issue. Well, the problem for most of us is we work with organizations, and we find that people very often find out that their organizations are siloed. meaning everyone in their particular department is focusing on the department's objectives and goals and loses track of how they have to coordinate with other people. So, for example, marketing is pushing a program that's what they want to sell in the next 3 months, whereas salespeople have to sell today. And customer service have to address what happened when the sale went out a month ago. So what's happening is if they're not communicating so that there's continuity and collaboration between these different departments, each silo is going off on its own direction, and the never good result of that is you have the kind of chaos you see on the bottom. Everyone going off in their own things. And very, very often when we get called into companies to help them, that's exactly the level we're working at, where people are in different directions and we need to bring them back to the cultural alignment. Part of it is not everyone always agrees on what the cultural norms and values are, because even though companies say they know what they are and they tell people what they are, and that's, by the way, not the majority, but a healthy minority, the individuals don't. I worked once as the president of a trade association, and we had a company in this association up in Rochester who told all of us at a meeting once how everyone knows exactly what the values and behaviors of the culture are. And that's the thing he's most proud of. And he was very successful, and we thought, like, wow, he's got a secret formula to this. So we do site visits periodically, and we went up to do the site visit. And when we went through that, he left us alone to work with the employees. And so I went over to somebody and I said, could you tell me something about the kind of culture that you have, the values, behaviors that are so fundamental to your company? He said, oh, I'd love to do that. Could you come with me? I'm going to show you something. And we take about 3 minutes to walk to his office. And on his office is a sheet that has all of the 17 values, culture values in the company, and he starts reading them. And it was clear he was reading them because he didn't know them. They weren't something that was inherent in what he's trying to do. And that's why it's so important. Peter Drucker, who's the father of management in many ways, has made this comment that everyone's heard: culture eats strategy for breakfast. No matter how good your strategy is, if your culture isn't supporting it, which is why we're talking about that today as success, it's not going to work. And that's what's really critical. And for what happens is when companies are smart enough to learn how to build a good strategy and are smart enough to focus on culture, what they don't do is really have an ongoing accountability system, a management operating system that's ongoing accountable, that drives alignment, that drives strategic performance. And we're going to show you a system that does that today. So the solution is simple. You start at the top and you work your way down to everybody in the company. You start by identifying your strategic objectives. So if you're a new bank, TD Bank, for example, and you're trying to encourage people to come into your bank, then what you're trying to do is offer something unique and different. And what they've decided to do is go 7 days a week, offering services early morning, late at night during the week, so they're the most convenient bank. And as we'll talk about that in the commanding strategies, that was for them a sustainable competitive advantage for good reasons, and understanding that is what makes it a commanding strategy. The second thing is identify the cultural values and norms. What are those that you want to have? We read all the time when mergers take place, like Sprint, when it merged with Nextel. 2 different cultures, 2 different value systems come together. 5 years later, they still struggle to make it work. It's critical that people have a value system that's integrated, so that people have an integrated value system so that they can work. Third part is, again, to have a management accountability system. This is really the critical part. I meet with a lot of people who facilitated what they call management retreats. We don't believe in retreats. We believe in leadership advances, because leadership should always be advancing to the next goal that it wants to achieve. And in doing that, you need to have an ongoing system to make sure that people are accountable for what they say they're going to do. But most important, learn that what they're really trying to do is not get it right, but make it better. And so it's not a catch them doing it wrong. It's finding out that they're doing what they're supposed to do, but how could they make it better? What learning is necessary? So for CLOs, they get this all the time, chief learning officers, that the real goal of a management accountability system is to create continuous improvement. And we're going to talk about how that can be done as well. So let's walk you through the 10-step process we think that pulls it all together. And I'm going to go through all of these as we go through it. You have an overview here. You have to identify what you're trying to do. You have to make sure that you have the right kind of people in the place. What are the leadership traits you're looking for? Then what you need to do is figure out a way to evaluate to make sure it works. Make sure that you're focusing on continuous improvement. And ultimately, when people succeed, make sure that they celebrate their achievement. I mentioned this to one of my clients that I mentor last week, and he really got it in the meeting. And about 2 hours later, I get an email that I was CC'd on that it turns out it was the 6th-year anniversary. Company is growing at 26% per year, and he realized they should celebrate. So everyone got a good lunch on the company's benefit. So that's the kind of thing you can do at any time. So let's start off in the beginning. Identify and articulate your company purpose. In other words, the CEO, president, COO, top executives have to sit down. Generally, we recommend doing it as an offsite so that there's some freedom in terms of thinking it out, and try to figure out exactly what is the purpose of this company. So that means, what's the vision? Where do they want to be? How do they want to change the world? Because that's really what the vision's about. So think of Starbucks when they first started. What they did is they started by trying to create what he called a third place. You have home, you have office, but what do people do in between? They don't have a third place, a place to hang out, to think, to have conversations. And that was how Starbucks started. That's why getting into the supermarkets and getting into other distribution channels for them was a challenge, because that wasn't part of the initial vision. But now the vision is to make their daily experience phenomenal. And that's what the coffee and all the other foods that they're now adding to the Starbucks enterprise are really all about. The mission is really, what is the purpose everyone has every day? Why am I going to work? Okay? Each person gets up each morning and has to feel energized to come to work. That's part of the problem. Most people don't know the mission, and therefore they're their own personal part of that mission. And as a result, they're not engaged in the company. So, why is this such an important thing to try to understand? Because when I get up in the morning at 4 in the morning to be a barista and show up at that time, what I'm really trying to do is make sure that every time someone walks into my Starbucks, they have a smile on their face because they're getting freshly brewed coffee with a real smile from me and everybody else, feeling great, and setting them off to have a phenomenal day. That's my mission. And if you have baristas, that's exactly how they see it, and that's what makes Starbucks so successful. Strategy. Strategy in many ways isn't what you do outside, it's a match. It's the use of the internal capabilities and resources to meet the customer's needs profitably. In other words, you have to look at what you do best. And if you don't do it best, maybe you shouldn't be in that business, and that shouldn't be your strategy. So you'll learn when we talk about commanding strategy later that the strength of TD Bank is the hours it's offering and the convenience, but not necessarily the depth and breadth of services. Many of the other banks offer many more services than they do, but they can't offer it in the same number of hours and still be profitable. That's where the trade-off takes place. And finally, we talked about culture. It's the behavior-based norms, the values, the actions, beliefs. So it's when you look at the quality of products, Apple, computer, Zappos, making sure people feel great about buying 72 shoes and returning 71 if they don't like them, but feeling good about it. If you're Starbucks, it's about employees and the growers of the coffee beans. All of that's really a critical part of it. The second part is to really go through the culture and really understand it, because you can't hire people to meet your culture until you really understand it. We do a program we'll be doing in 3 weeks on mentoring internships. And many of the companies we work with, really leading companies, they understand that the value of a great internship is to basically find a farm club of people who at some point now or in the future you can hire, who fit your culture, because you've had a chance to watch them for a period of time and to see if they do it. Because a resume only tells you about their learnings, the skills and experiences tells you about their skills, but do they really fit your culture? So you really want to know, what are our values? Are we really being transparent? Okay. If you read today's paper, you'll see that it turns out General Motors actually sought the parts that it needed for the recall I think it's 2 weeks or 2 months before they actually announced that they had a problem. But they haven't told anyone about that till now. So even to this point, transparency isn't taking place. What are the norms? Are you celebrating success publicly? Are you making it that people feel they should be working together as a team? If, when you think about a whistleblower, that means somebody in a company violated a norm. If whistleblowing is accepted, that means the standard of doing the right thing and making sure the team benefits from it, that's your norm. So it could be part of it. It could be how you handle time off. Many companies today view people as independent who are giving their heart and soul to the company if they really like it. And so the exchange for that is, instead of having very routine definitions of what time off is for a holiday or a purpose or everything, it's a flexible thing. They can take off time that they need within some kind of structure that works. And finally, what are the practices? Okay, this is a real question of how the culture is being done throughout the entire company. I ran for 7 years a mentoring program within a large company that serves, actually, it's an association, 50,000 members. And they were having problems keeping new people in the company because people get hired, they work in their silo, but the people that they want to grow into, the position they want to grow into, weren't opening up because it's pretty much of a young workforce. And so the problem was there weren't necessarily new slots opening up in that department. One of the solutions was to take a look at the fact that the company may had another way of expanding. That was horizontally, offering different services in different locations in different parts. But within a silo, you don't know. If you're in accounting, you don't really know what the research department might be doing or how sales and marketing is doing something different. So the net result of that was we needed to make a change. So one of the practices became one of offering an orientation of the whole company when even a new employee came in or even an intern came in, and allowing them to have, let's say, half a dozen different interviews with key people in different departments just so they know more about that. And that led people to stay longer because they could move from one department to another. That means you really have to understand something. In any company, everyone doesn't agree. If the CEO has his own value system and everyone else follows it, then people are going to be unhappy. The key is to understand that we have a group of people who are dedicated to the enterprise purpose, but may have different value systems about how to do it and need to make trade-offs. And they need to have that understanding of how they're going to make it. So we all run into day in, day out. Do I do this on time? I'm running out of time, but do I compromise on quality? Speed versus quality. It's kind of a decision we need to make. We want the highest quality. We want to do it fast, but if we're running out of time, what do we do and do we make it? Are we focusing on cost or are we focusing on our reputation? Clearly, Apple isn't offering a cheapest iPhone or iPad tablet today. It's after an reputation of quality and an ecosystem of products and services that go together. Cost is higher and people are willing to pay the difference. Are you following the traditional route or are you willing to innovate? Are you going to willing to try new things out and see if it works? We had a very interesting conversation recently with Howard Behar, who was president of Starbucks, and he was talking about the project that was the predecessor for Frappuccino, and everyone thought it was going to be the best thing you could ever imagine. It didn't work. But the point was the success of it, and that's the beautiful part of innovation, was that it opened up the door to see something new, which led to Frappuccino. So celebrating, as he says, failures can be very important because that helps you understand what was work and create the next success. Are you protecting something that you have, or are you promoting something that you want to move to? Are you focusing on the local market or on the global market? Are you making trade-offs? Think companies produce products. Where is the process that they're working on? Are we promoting people as unions do on seniority or based on merit? Clearly, the Teachers Association is having a problem. So we have to acknowledge, no matter what our company is, we do have competing values and strategies that we need to work with. Well, the competing values framework is a phenomenal tool that helps you resolve it. It recognizes that there are unconscious and deliberate trade-offs, and through what we do and we facilitate in advance gives you an opportunity to really explore what am I trying to do. So, for example, think of the green that you're looking at right here in terms of the spectrum. I can either have a lot of flexibility and discretion in what people do, or I can be very stable and controlled, my vertical axis, okay? I have to make those different decisions based on where I want to be. Am I focusing on internal things on the left, or am I focusing on the external world on the right? And the result is very different. So, for example, if I'm all about my people but giving them flexibility, I'm in the top left-hand quadrant called people, and I'm focusing on giving my people as much discretion as I can, making sure they're fitting their values. That's my major attention. That contrasts with the bottom right, which is focusing on the results that I'm producing for somebody else and making sure that I have a stable and controlled system to do it that's constantly replicable and scalable. Okay. So they're completely different opposite values. Am I focusing on the process, the bottom left hand corner that's stable because it's internal? What do we do here? Do we have a procedure that follows? Are we following the procedures manual? Do we know exactly how to do it? Everyone knows what the procedures are and they've read it all perfectly. Or am I on the right hand top corner focusing on innovation? Okay. How do I make a change? How do I do something new? Those are traditionally the trade-offs that companies make without being very conscious of them. But when they make that and they make those trade-offs, they know where they're going and they're able to move forward. The third part of this schema is outlining what I've called now the commanding strategy, which is how do we distinguish ourselves, in Starbucks' case, from other coffee outlets, okay? So unique taste and quality. Remember, their whole language is different. It's an Italian description of sizes, okay? You can't ask for tall and medium, okay? It's venti. I mean, you have to ask it. You have to actually learn their language, how different that is than the traditional American coffee shop. And that they did differently is when they decided we want to give people a third place. That was their value, and therefore they had to build a strategy to do it. Free Wi-Fi, music, comfortable chairs. It was a very different approach. So building it around what they're trying to do makes it different. Why is it sustainable? Because part of it is something other competitors can't do, and opening up a story that lets people realize they're not doing it. So Starbucks is full of the story about how they treat their vendors and their employees in different ways. Remember, Howard Schultz created a system early on that every employee, even minimum time that you have to work, I think it's 20 hours, gets health care. Why? Because that was a value that's very important to him, and it makes it distinguishable from other companies, okay? And that allowed them to stay open to new distribution methods for the coffee and offering the new products. It becomes very important to do because now they realize these things can fit the values. I can tell you, if you read Howard Schultz's book, he resisted many of these changes for many years until he realized if you change the vision and the mission a little bit, then you can be open to this and you can change this new vision of giving everyone a phenomenal experience daily with coffee, regardless of where they are. So that becomes what we want our people to do. Okay, we want them to perform, aiming at the competitive advantage we need so we can be more profitable, more successful than our competitors. We need a culture that supports every piece that we do. It's focusing on where we're going. But within that, the people who are making us move forward are the leaders. Okay, the leadership traits that they have are absolutely critical because if they're not leading us every day to perform better as a culture, better as a strategy, we won't achieve what we're doing. And the ultimate goal for most leaders is understanding its personal and professional growth that we're trying to give each individual. So it's a very one-on-one basis, helping each single employee through the company. How's that done? Well, here are some of the critical variables. First, you need to be clear what your purpose is. Many people are not very clear what the purpose of the company is. You ask them, they cannot define it. It's one of the reasons I spent time in the beginning talking about purpose instead of vision and mission with our values and our goals and our strategy. You need to really be very clear. And that's why once a year, I recommend any company that's not exactly in the next year the same as it was the prior year, go and refine it and redefine it. Just as Starbucks did, just as Home Depot made changes in how it's going. Every single company, think of IBM, it's changing its whole structure. Leaders have to be very clear about it or they can't help others. Leaders also have to demonstrate passion. You can't expect people to be engaged in the process and passionate about it if their leaders aren't serving as a role model to do with it and setting reasonable expectations. Because remember, the real disappointment is when someone's expectation is not met. And if it's not met for an unreasonable reason, that's not going to work for you. It's got to be reasonable because then you can help people work on it. What a great leader ultimately does is inspire a team and offer mentoring, helping people find within themselves the skills, the strength, the willingness to have courage to be able to do what they're doing. On a management perspective, it's about holding people accountable. We all want that as individuals. It's the irony. If you ask children about whether they want to have any rules or no rules, they all want some rules. We all want to be we all want to be held to a standard that we can perform and feel good about it and be held accountable, because then we can also say we did well. So it's about doing that. And then give people a chance to take full responsibility. The not invented here is irrelevant. It's about the fact that I can do this, I have the capabilities to do it, and I want to do it. And sometimes, if the leader is really smart and he realizes I'm doing all the things that keep my company going, continuous improvement means breaking new ground. It means thinking about things that haven't been done and taking us to the next level. It's what we like to call, which is where this whole program comes from, better ways. Find a better way to do something. That means you're encouraging creativity and innovation. That's why the Better Way workshop and webinars was created this year, to help share with you ways of doing it, including the one we'll be doing in a couple of weeks on innovation. The fifth part now is, if you've done this, you've taken the leadership traits that you want to see our leaders do. You know what the values are, and you've got a sense of strategic performance. It's time now to start defining these so that we can measure it. So, for example, strategic performance expectations are both for individuals and teams, and you can pick either one that you want to do it. And it could be things like sales volume, profit margins, okay, defect rates, recall rates, okay, what's the value of your company's brand image, what's your net promoter score, for example. Maybe if you're in the accounting department, it's AR outstanding, inventory turnover. In other words, there's standards we can all use. And whereas people sometimes don't want to be held accountable, it's being held accountable that makes you become the best that you can be. And that's what we're trying to help you do. If you do that and you've developed those standards, now comes the really hard part that most companies have not done, and that is to ask the question, how do I measure that it really works? If I give you kind of a loose scale, are you average, above average, below average? What does that mean? Your average and my average are completely different. Your above average is how much above average, or below average is how much above average, below average. The problem with soft indicators is they give you nothing that you can use to grow on and stand on a platform to be able to move to the next level. However, if you develop specific criteria to evaluate, then you have something that you can do. So, for example, a sales department might look at any of these different variables: leads, prospects, closings. Some of these are activity related, some are results related. So the percentage of repeat business is clearly about a result, okay? Whereas the number of leads is an activity that you've generated. A number of presentations doesn't tell you how much you're going to close. Closing is the result. So what you need to do is really look at everything you're doing and find as many different indicators of the kind of things that you believe contribute to strategic success so that you can achieve it. Now, this is what's new and unique for most people. So let me walk you backwards a second. About 7 years ago, a gentleman in Arizona created a system that allowed him to actually measure the degree to which performance could take place. And he called this system Evaluate to Win. And basically what it does is it allows you, as I'm going to walk you through here, to create a point system for any indicator that you want to use, whether it's a value system or a leadership system or a strategic performance system on a 1 to 10 scale, where you can measure how successful somebody is. He implemented this in a company that actually is in a very interesting area. It's a an aerospace repair company. And when you go through a recession, and as many of you know, when economics is tough, you delay preventive maintenance because it's not the number one thing that you have to do, and it's a way to be able to cut back on money. Nevertheless, his company continued to grow at over 20% per year every year for 7 straight years. When I heard about that, I wanted to know, because I'm an evaluator, I wanted to know how a system worked. For those of you who know, I did the first national evaluation of the needs of handicapped children to Head Start services. And based on that, launched the programs that today exist. These 10 model programs, and today is part of legislation that a certain number of children percentages of slots for every Head Start program are there for those children who have some kind of handicap. So having these kind of criteria really makes sense. He happened to show it to Jack Welch, who runs the Jack Welch Management Institute, who fell in love with it, thought it was terrific, and became a partner in the spin-off called Evaluate to Win. I heard about this because I'm an evaluator. I fell in love with it, and we represent them here in the New York area. It's called Eval to Win. You can look it up, EVAL, the number 2, Win. And we can show you how it works in a one-on-one demo. It's a concept. Whether you buy the system or not is irrelevant to us. It's the concept that you understand. So let me walk you through it. What you're going to do when you take any indicator, are you aligned, let's assume, with the mission? Okay? You articulate what that means in terms of specific behaviors. And then we're going to scale it from 0 to 10 to see what you did. So for example, and I'm using now actually the Evaluate to Win example to do it. If I say to you, do you know our mission? Remember when I mentioned the case of Rochester, the people knew their mission really well and they could walk to a board and read it. The question is, do you really know it? His standard was simple. If I asked him that question, he turned to me, looked me in the eye, and he could verbatim give me the mission. He got 4 out of 10 points. If he couldn't and he got part of it, he paraphrased it, maybe he gets 2. If he goes, I think our mission is to drink a lot of Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, he'd get a 0. Then the second criteria he said is, okay, now give me examples, concrete examples of what you've done. And I want 3 examples, and you get 2 points for each. So if you knew the mission and you got the 3 examples perfectly right, you got your full 10 points. And so I can create a system that does that. If I can then turn to you and say, but you know something, here's an example of where you took a client that was desperate for help, and you basically said, it's 5:30, I'm leaving, goodbye, and hung up on them, well, you might lose 2 points. These are the decisions you make in your own tool, but the beauty of the tool is it allows you to do it. And you can use it in many ways. So let's take the how well are you selling. I might argue that if you exceed sales quota, you get 10 points. I might argue that if you meet the quota, you did good. You got 9 points. But you had exceeded to get to 10. Okay, again, I could define it this way or not. I might argue that if you miss quota by just a little bit, you lose a lot. It's not like 1%. Maybe it's only 6. Because the point is, at this point, you've been here 3 years, you shouldn't be missing quota at all. And if you're missing in more than 11 to 20%, we've got a real problem. Okay? In fact, if you go below by 20%, maybe you get 0 points. Maybe it's time to decide whether you should still be here or not. Because again, you only miss quota over a period of time. Have you been getting continuous improvements? Have you been asking for help all this time? Are you listening? Are you receptive to the information? All of that will be part of what I'd be measuring to find out whether or not they got it. So an objective scoring system lets me know a lot. And here's an example of what the Eval to Win board looks like to give you an example. So as you can see, I have this dashboard with about 10 different people. He happens to use the names of presidents, so it's cute. And what you're seeing here is that they all have an alignment score to the values, performance, are they doing what they're supposed to do, and leadership scores. And what he's created is just a color code system to make life easy. So I look at this and I've got, if you notice, I've got 6 people. 60% of my people are in the top quadrant, top right quadrant, quadrant 2. They're all getting over 6 out of 10. That's the standard that we set. That's great, because what that lets me know is I'm doing fairly well. I'm not very happy, on the other hand, by that red on the bottom left, because I've got this one guy, his name's John Tyler, who's got 0 alignment just about. He's a 1. He's got very little performance. You know something? He doesn't really want to work here anymore. And he's telling us that in many ways. And so Jack Welch would say, you know, you want to keep the top 20% of your people and promote them, and you want to take your bottom 10% and let go of them, he'd be probably the person we'd let go. But what makes this interesting for success is the 3 yellows. So let's take a look at them. When I look at this yellow in the bottom left quadrant, I'm looking at a person who's not very attuned to the values below average. He's not very attuned to the strategic performance. So he's neither a success because of his will, his attitude, nor his performance. This person should be talked to and probably let go if he can improve in the next quarter. Contrast that with the one in the top right quadrant, where we see a person who's really well aligned. He's a 9 in alignment. He loves the values of the company. He follows the line. He tries to do things. All the values that we have, he's a great role model for them. But he's not performing at all. He's a terrible performer. Now, we need to analyze why. The manager should be able to figure out that maybe he's just not skilled anymore. Turns out he got a promotion, And maybe let's use the example of the Peter principle. He's now in a position of managing salespeople instead of selling. So he loves what he does, hence he's got great attitude. But the fact is, he's not a manager. He shouldn't be there. So maybe we just need to move him to another job. The point is, we want to keep the person. We just got to figure out why this job isn't working for them. And finally, contrast that with the one on the bottom right quadrant, where he's a 10 in performance, but very low, a 1 when it comes to cultural values. Again, an example, that could be a salesperson. The average salesperson sells $100,000 a month. He's selling 250. He's a super salesman. He's got that perfect spot. However, he's accused of harassing people in the company every 2 weeks, can't keep an assistant for more than 3 days in a row, refuses to work with anyone else, refuses to actually even meet with management. It's what we call a cancer. Okay, he's got the skill, but he's going to ruin the culture. And since culture eats strategy for breakfast, shouldn't be in this company much longer. Next, you want to focus on continuous improvement. The system I've given you allows you to look at how much can I do better in my culture and my attitudes, how much can I do better in my strategic performance, how much of a better leader can I be, and can I then evaluate that and take a look at it. Many companies I work with, they'll tell me, oh, we have an evaluation system, we bring them aboard, maybe we put them on probation for the first quarter, and then we evaluate them once a year, and we use this really terrible instrument, and it doesn't really tell us very much because they're all above average. That's why we're keeping them here. Our argument is you don't improve people, especially if you're promoting people, and they're in new jobs, if you're only looking at them once a year. Our philosophy is you should be evaluating people from a continuous improvement point of view as often as makes sense. So, for example, I bring in a new employee and I tell them for the first 3 months, we're going to see if they fit in the company and they've got the skills to do what they're going to do. If they do exceedingly well, I might say, you've done excellent. You know what we're going to do? We're going to evaluate you in the next 3 months and then maybe at the end of 6 months. Or maybe we'll just evaluate you at the end of the next 9 months. But on the other hand, you had some problems. I've got this call that I can evaluate you in 6 months. So I will evaluate you at the end of the second quarter, and I will discover what the issue is. Now, if it turned out you really did very poorly in the first 90 days and I really need to know more, I could evaluate you monthly for the next month, 2 months, 3 months. In other words, no one has to be on the same frequency. The value of the frequency of evaluation in terms of months, quarter, year is a function of how much help you need for continuous improvement. And here's the key to success. It isn't about some global concepts that the CEO and this president of a company are looking at. It's all about getting down to the dyad. The dyad, meaning the relationship between the two key people, every employee and every supervisor, because they have to have a conversation. What are you doing? Do you like your job? Do you want to get better? What do we have to do that? How do we help you grow? Let's document what you need to do, and let's take a look at it at the next frequent period of time to figure out how we can make you become a more effective person. That's really the goal. So the critical part about this whole philosophy of evaluate to win is that what it's focusing on is that the better way of helping employees succeed, helping teams succeed, helping plants succeed, helping country parts succeed, is by taking the company and putting it all together, but getting down to the absolute building block, the dyad, every employee and his or her supervisor, and making sure they're constantly focusing on how they can do better and grow the company. That's the key. Now, to do that, we obviously need support and training, and that's key. So companies that are consistent, that already believe in having a training and support function, whether it's CLOs or anything else, those are the companies that really need to take a look at how they're currently assessing attitudes, assessing alignment to the culture, assessing strategic performance, and whether or not they're really feeding into the level of support they need on a regular basis. So what you need to do is specify what's the best way to do it now that we've identified we want to improve it. It might be you want to send them to school classes. So people today who are in marketing and have been doing this for many years may really find it valuable to take special courses on digital marketing and learn how that's changed, how people react differently to information. You might engage them in new procedures. Computer simulations is a phenomenal way. You can do online, blended training. There's all kinds of different ways of training people right now, and that should be part of the continuous improvement process. If you're a professional in your sales, you might want to go to sales conferences. so that you learn from different techniques from other people. Remember, we learn from watching the insights and perspectives of other people to a very great extent. You also want to encourage creativity for innovation. Again, we'll talk about this in much more depth in a couple of weeks, but what you really want to do is maybe find the Google, which is 20% of your time, or the 3M, which is 15% of your time, and Intuit, 10% of your time. They provide extra time when you have an idea that you can go ahead and pursue it, and many of them don't just do it during their weekday, but they take this work home at night. Remember, AdSense, $1 billion product line for Google, came out of the extra time work. In fact, his boss is in the new book that's out on Google, The Google Way, talks about the fact that his boss said, look, you've been doing this for a long period of time. It's not working. I think maybe you reached the point where it doesn't work. And that night, he had his breakthrough. The second part is you want to facilitate teamwork. It takes an individual to be creative. It takes a team to be innovative. And that's really the key part. How do you facilitate that? How do you help people support new ideas? How do you deal with disruption within the process? These are all the processes that need to take place to channel great ideas into great innovation. And then you want to measure the extent to which these actions are really taken. It's one thing to say we're open to new ideas. We all know people used to have suggestion boxes for many, many years, and then you put it in on top and it ended on the bottom, going into the garbage can. You really want to make sure it's used, and that's why we're actually building a brand new program we're going to be offering people next year on 10 models of innovation that we think are really great that we're watching companies use of all sizes, because unfortunately no one's really been doing that lately. And the final part is when you do achieve a better situation, there is greater alignment to the culture. There is greater leadership skills, both in terms of what people are assuming and the training that they're providing them. And people are performing their jobs better. So again, if you're doing those windshield wipers and you figured out a way to get them on a little bit faster using a little bit more automation, so you have more time to ask a different question about the car, and maybe the answer is it's squeaking the glass, and maybe we can figure out a way to solve that. That's what you want to do. You want to celebrate achievement. So you need to involve your employees in this process. Just like Ford many years ago said, quality is job one, and created quality circles. We believe in innovation circles. We believe in success circles where you deal with the alignment and success going together. You want to celebrate the moments, not just because you make people feel good, but it inspires others. It encourages others. And that's really the goal that people are trying to create. They want to do it. Finally, you want to feed these experiences into the processes to fuel repetition and involvement by others. You know, it's infectious. You know, Brian Tracy says that sales is the transfer of enthusiasm. Well, I think success is the transfer of success, where people are inspired and they're feeling very positive about what they're doing, and they feel they can move forward. And so that is why it is so important to celebrate success. So in sum, I'm going to put it all together. This is a lot of information we've covered, and I think 90% of you have stayed with us from the beginning to the end of this presentation to really get it. We're dealing with three very different ideas. We're dealing with culture, strategy, and leadership. That with you hold the key to success, because what you need to do is first figure out what you want to do, define it, so that you understand how it fits into it. What you want to do is make sure that you're sharing those elements of strategy and culture with everybody in your management team, and then cascading it down to every single employee. Every single employee, from the janitor up, needs to know that what they're doing is sending a rocket ship to the moon. And the goal is, and the reason for that is we're going to send a man to the moon and bring him back safely by the end of the decade, as John F. Kennedy said. And it didn't matter whether the engineer who did it, the physicist who did it, the rocket scientist who did it, or the janitor. You all contribute. You want to make sure that the expectations are always reasonable. And that's what's really wonderful. I can see one of the questions, like, who sets up the standards? Thank you very much, James. That's the beauty of this thing. The standards are actually set up by the dyad. In other words, I sit down with my employee and I say, well, how do we define what you're doing? And together we come up with something that's reasonable and an expectation that both of us think we can achieve. And how do we know if it is? Like, I didn't compromise too much or you didn't demand too little. The answer is I have to report to my boss. And so I'm going to show it. And he's going to say, well, why is it you're giving people a 10 if they show up, and every other team leader is saying, you get a 3 for showing up? Okay, so my standards are wrong, and I get now continuous improvement and change that. You want to make sure that when you come up with your standards, you've come up with an objective scoring system, that the criteria that you're going to manage can be measured, again, 0 to 10. So it's very clear, if I got a 6 now, I'm doing okay, but I can get a 6.57 maybe next year. I constantly want to get better. The key here, obviously, is evaluating it and having feedback. And the feedback, remember, is valued on the criteria of, am I continuously improving? Am I getting better? Is my team getting better? Are we figuring out how to do it? Because that's our goal. Finally, once we've done that, make sure you celebrate achievements and plan for even more tomorrow. Because again, you as a whole are constantly improving. There are very, very, very few public companies who are going to sit down with an investor and say, we did X sales this year and next year we're going to do X minus because we feel good about it. Okay? It's always about doing more. And that's what you have to aim for. And with that, I want to thank you for today's presentation. I really appreciate you coming back and listening to today's presentation. If you would like more information, feel free to visit Presentation Excellence Group, where we have a lot of information on commanding strategies and evaluate to win and all the parts of what we're working on. For those of you who are in the New York area, I do want to let you know that we're piloting our very first really unique workshop on this whole philosophy. It'll be taking place in December, so you can email me and I'll send you some details on it. We're just literally announcing it for the first time today. And the concept's really simple. It's a practicum workshop, half a day. Every CEO can come only if he or she brings another C-level leader, so they can actually do the defining of the attributes and come up with some criteria to see if it works. I want to again invite you to come to the other, I think I'm actually number 6. So the next 6 programs that are going to exist. And next week, again, this Wednesday rather, is the brand's life cycle. It's all about branding and the life cycle for marketing. Cloud computing follows. Mentoring is the week after. And there's another 3 that'll follow that. We thank you for attending the Better Way workshops and webinars, especially our webinars. If there's a webinar you'd like to see us do, please let us know. We're already beginning the spring one. We have somebody flying in March for the first one. And we're taking new topics in that we hear all the time. Let me see if there are any additional questions we have. Well, how did Jack Welch get involved? So it turns out that Lee, who's the CEO of actually Able Engineering, he was turning this company around, and he had developed as part of the system Evaluate to Win, and was not only a Vistage member. This is how I know him. Vistage is a network or a group of 18,000 CEOs running $500 to $500 million companies who all want more and do better. He was part of that, but he's also attending the Jack Welch Management Institute, getting additional skills from that. And after he developed his system and he asked Jack, could he recommend some tools, and he couldn't, he said, would you like to see what I developed? And that's how it came out, and I just happened to read about it at the end of a signature for somebody and then fell in love with it and used it. So that's how I heard of it. And again, I can provide you with a demo so you can see the philosophy and how it's practiced behind. I just gave you a quick shot and a PowerPoint on that here. With that, I don't see any additional questions, so I'm going to thank everybody again for attending today's webinar, and invite you to this Wednesday's one, and invite you to all the other ones that we're going to do, especially in 3 weeks, the one on commanding strategies, for 4 weeks, commanding strategies, because we're going to follow up on this, because we're going to teach you how to use it to dominate your competition. Have a great